if we got to a point where you could do a 3D motion analysis of a swimmer
Oh,
easily, then that
mm,
would be probably the gold standard of being
mhm.
able to work out like which movement patterns, arm angles, and joint locations is going to
Oh.
be optimal for that swimmer.
Welcome to Social Kick. I'm Brian Lundquist. We got the full crew: Dr. John Mullen, Luke Baddington, and joining us from Down Under, Nick Smith. What's going on, Nick? How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Well, we're good, but we're going to be better as soon as we get to talk to the mad scientist behind all of these amazing Australian swimming performances. We were talking to Cam McEvoy recently, and obviously he's had a resurgence in his career, and he really emphasized in our conversation with him about how big a component thinking about the strength and building strength in swimming specific ways has really led to his success. And he mentioned what a role that you played in that, and recommended we have this conversation. So I just want to say, thanks for joining, and why. What did Cam mean when he mentions you amongst the success he's having, and what's the type of work that you're working on that's having an impact for the Dolphins?
Yeah, so Cam obviously trained down at the Gold Coast for most of his like junior career. Went to a couple of Olympics under coaches down on the Gold Coast, and had a break after Tokyo, and moved to Brisbane at the end of last year. And he approached the QAS at the time and said that he wanted to have a bit of support from some people, some experts in technique and training. Wanted to talk about, I guess, a training philosophy that he had in mind towards sprint swimming. And I had a meeting with him, I think maybe October, November last year, and I wasn't sure like where it was going to go. I had sort of downloaded all his races and looked through his times and splits, and had a bit of an opinion on where I thought he could find some time in his 50 particularly, and also in the 100. And yeah, like everything I said, he was like, yeah, I agree. I think like that would be a good goal. That'd be a good target. Let's do it. Like, this is what I want to do. I want you to help me. And we pretty much kicked off like 2 weeks later, and I've been working with him since. So yeah, it's been a good journey, and he's really exciting to work with. He's really open to doing things, takes on advice, and is accountable to his training and to his improvements, which I think is a really key thing. Like when he takes ownership of his program, that's when you start to actually see the results. So it's been good to watch.
Before I started wearing Magic 5 goggles, I didn't notice how many times that I would stop and clear out my goggles in between reps. But then once I started wearing them, I realized that I didn't have that same need, not just for fog, but for comfort.
Yep.
And I just had a tendency to like take my goggles off for a quick break, because I don't know why. Once I started wearing really comfortable goggles, I stopped doing that. And that's really what Magic 5 does for me. It's like I just have a comfortable goggle that's tailor cut for my face. So you can support Social Kick directly by picking up a pair of Magic 5 goggles using our affiliate link. Go to themagic5.com/socialkick.
I want to dive into what you do exactly, and I want to get a little preface. So I was always happy that the three of us, Brian, John, and I, we all swim. We had our specialties. Brian held a world record. John is a swimming scientist. Literally wrote a book called Swimming Science. And I guess I'm from the Caribbean. But we've had people from the Caribbean on. We've had world record holders on. We've never had another swimming scientist on. What is a swimming scientist? And what is it you do? Do you call yourself that? Like, define that for me. We all have an idea, but
Yeah.
how will you define what you do?
Yeah. So in Australia, we've had sports scientists for a while as sort of like a fairly established career. They usually specialize in a particular discipline when they're aligned to a certain sport. So at the QAS, we have a performance science division where there's people specializing in physiology. So looking at like training methodologies and things to enhance training performance, like altitude and recovery. And in swimming, they would work closely with the coaches on how they're prescribing their sets, how they monitor their training so that they can track improvement, and work with the coach to help that aspect. And then my specialty is biomechanics and skill acquisition. So I sort of work with the technique side of things. So a lot of filming and watching video of training, and working with that more so directly with the athletes to establish like what are their key priorities for their strokes or for their starts and turns. What's going to make the biggest impact on their performances in the upcoming season. We design a plan to improve that, how to give them feedback based on their personality, how do they learn best, and then sort of monitoring competition performances throughout the season. So I don't know if you see, we have like these big cameras that sit up the back of the stands. We film the whole race. We break down the details of their race into really specific points and give them feedback during the competition about where they might be able to improve from a heat to a final. And then we use those performances to go back and work out what they need to do in training to get better for the next season. So yeah, there's a fair bit involved, but mainly movement science is my official title, but that's really like the performance analysis, the biomechanics, and then the skill development side. Yeah.
And you're at the Queensland Academy of Sports, which is a government funded that focuses on athletes that are training in Queensland, and you focus only on the swimmers, yeah? There.
Yeah.
And it could be any of the clubs. Yeah.
I work mainly with the St. Peter's program, so that's with Dean, and there's a lot of athletes there, so that takes up a fair bit of my time. And then Cam is the other athlete that I work in addition to that. So on the national team this year, that was 11 athletes. So it's exciting.
Right. Well, give me an example then how you would. Let's go back to Cam, because he's part of the show and you work him a lot. What's an example of how you talk about you working as biomechanics for the athletes? So the advice you give him, the work you give him is different. If I was a world champion, you'll give me, because I'm Luke and I'm not Cam. What's something that Cam does well that you've worked on, and what's something that you're working on him right now with? He talks about his start often, Cam, So talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So his start was probably the main focus point that we wanted to improve in the last season leading into World Championships. He had a pretty clear idea about how fast he needed to be sort of up with his main international competitors. So we did a bit of a breakdown of some of his competitors, worked out that he needed to probably take off about 0.2 of a second from his 15-meter time. And that was going to be a combination of how much velocity he was generating off the block, and how he was doing that, his entry angle into the pool, how deep he goes, when does he start his first kick, when does he break out. So it was a really meticulous process of breaking down the on-block phase, the entry, and then the underwater component of his start to find that 0.2. And that was in combination with the work that he was doing in the gym and the mobility work that he was doing, all sort of working together to find that time. And Cam's really good. He's like really, he's probably the most repetitive athlete that I've seen in terms of like really small bandwidth between a number of trials. So I work with him at least once a week. He comes in and probably does anywhere from 3 to 10 dives over a 2-hour period. And he knows when something's off. Like he'll be able to say, this one fell off, or I went a little bit too deep on this one. I reckon my time was 5:50, and he'll always be within like 0.05 of his 15-meter time. So he's really tuned in to his performance. Yeah.
And you just mentioned, communicating with Cam, and like you said, he can often tell something's wrong with the start and things like that. How does it work with Dean and kind of working through coaches? I know when I was working with some elite athletes, especially when swimming science or sports science was starting to come around, it was like, we have the scientists coming in, talking to the athletes. We have the coaches talking to the athletes, but it's a different kind of message sometimes, or it's not always provided the same way, but on the science side as it is the coaches side. And some coaches were fine with that. Other ones not so fine with that because they want to be, you know, kind of in charge of how these things are delivered. So tell us how you kind of go about it and how it works at QAS.
Yeah, so I think it's different, as you said, depending on the coach that you're working with. I've worked with 4 or 5 like high performance coaches over the last 2 Olympic cycles, and they're all, they communicate with their athletes differently. Some of them want you to communicate with them first, and then they disseminate the information to the athlete. Dean and I've known Dean for about 11 years now, so he and I have a pretty good relationship. And probably more importantly, we're aligned on what a technical model looks like for each of the strokes. So when we look at something from above the water, we normally agree on what needs to be fixed. So that trust is there, and that makes it much easier for me to work directly with the swimmers. So he pretty much gives me full autonomy to work out what needs to be fixed. I run a lot of it by him anyway. But then he'll say like, go ahead and, do it. You got to make sure you cover 15 athletes in a couple of weeks. So I just sort of have to plan when I'm working with who and what we're focusing on, and I just keep him updated with that. But it's a good relationship, and it allows me to be effective in that program.
And you mentioned that you and Dean having the same biomechanical model, and PT we have a gait analysis or a running analysis with their specific phases and things that we know to look for. Where in swimming, I think it's, a little bit more undecided, at least universally, on proper, biomechanics and things like that. So is this something that you and him like have kind of, how structured is this? Or is it more just you guys have been riffing over the last 11 years about kind of similar things that you like in athlete strokes? And is it kind of universal for every athlete that you're looking to accomplish? Or is it very independent based off of each swimmer?
So it's pretty qualitative swimming compared to some other sports. They're obviously looking at a lot of video and using basic physics principles to work out what's going to create more drag and what's going to be better for acceleration. In terms of the free swim technique, probably just like understanding how each coach looks at the stroke and what key things they're focusing on, and that's probably what we agree on the most. We have a testing pool here at the QAS that gets into the granular detail of starts and turns. So there's a lot of numbers around starts and turns that we can measure, which is what Cam's using to improve his 50. So if there's something that we're sort of like investigating with starts and turns, we can get a pretty clear idea about what works and doesn't work when they come here for testing. And there's some tools that we can use to measure free swim velocity to look at different strokes. And I think the point that you made about it being individual is really important, particularly when you've got for example, I got Shayna, Molly, and Arnie all swimming against each other. They all swim very different freestyles, and maximizing their strengths and not necessarily trying to make them all swim like each other is important.
Yeah. What are some of the most common things that you see across all swimmers that are like suboptimal from a movement standpoint? I mean, I know it can change by maybe distance for sprinter groups or, men and women. I'm just curious, like where do you, if you were to write a short list of like the low hanging fruit of what swimmers do wrong biomechanically, like what's at the top of that list?
We're having this discussion the other day actually with a few scientists, and I think for me, I'm always looking at I look at a lot of freestyle because I work with freestyle, but for backstroke and freestyle, hip and shoulder rotation is probably the biggest one for me. And commonly you'll see hand placements out wide or hands crossing over in front, but usually it's not because their hands in the wrong spot. It's usually because their hip and shoulders are rotating too much or not. The timing's not right. So I look at a lot of front-on video, and I look at how the hips and shoulders interact, and there's sort of like a bit of a minimum standard as to how much they should move throughout the stroke, and whether that movement might be restricted by flexibility or whether it's strength and core stability, trying to diagnose like what the problem is. And typically you find that when you can fix hip and shoulder rotation to what you want, that the arms and legs sort of like move into the right position that you're after. So that's probably the key one for me.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit more, because all too often I see people treating the symptoms and not the cause. And they're not looking to find out, why are you crossing over? Why are you not having elbow up? Not looking what's causing it all. That's also your approach, right? You're trying to figure out, why is that person doing this? Why is, in the first place, and treat that. Do you have to do your elite athletes, can they make that adjustment really quickly? You mentioned that Cam can make that adjustment in his dive in no time at all. Do you find that elite athletes can figure that cause out? Because it can be kind of complicated. We've done millions of yards or meters, with always the shoulder going this way. You ask them to go like this now, or whatever it is. How do you find the elite athletes respond to you?
All over the place. So you have athletes like at Cam's end that are pretty in tune and they can make a change. And I've got a couple of other athletes that, if you say the right thing, they'll be able to make the change. Maybe in, a couple of 100 meters of swimming, they get to a point that's pretty good. Other athletes, like I've been, working on some things for, 6 months, and they haven't like quite made the change yet. But it's about finding. It's really important that they understand what you're trying to say, and you're not trying to, put words in their mouth. If they don't understand what you're trying to change, they're not going to make the change. And then probably the other thing is they need to be able to feel the difference between what they were doing and what you want them to do. So when they do it well, it's about getting them to articulate to you how that feels. And they'll probably use a whole bunch of different words or an explanation that like you don't think of, but it works for them. So I always try and, if you're going through like a diagnosis process of, okay, this is what I see that you're doing wrong. This is what we need to get to do. And here are a couple of drills to help you work on that. And then when they nail it, you say, okay, what were you thinking about then? What were what was going through your head, and what did it feel like? And then, we either write it down or I'll remember that for the next time that I'm working with them. So they come up with the solution, or you want them
to. What if you're wrong? Like, how often you say something like, crap, that's a wrong suggestion, I'm sorry. You get that back and you change and you adapt and go back?
Yeah, always. I think, you try something for a period of time, and that's probably a bit loose, like how long's a piece of string. And if you find that they're not, like they can't do it, then you need to find a different way. Because if you both agree that making that change is important to improving performance, then I think they're usually open to trying something different. So definitely don't always get it right first time. But it's the understanding the athlete, having a good relationship with them, because they have to trust that you know what you're talking about when you're giving them a technical cue, and giving it time to make the change. So I normally allow a big chunk of time for them to work on one or two things, not trying to overload them with a whole bunch of stuff that they need to change.
Circling back to Cam, like you said, you haven't been working with him that long. He took some time off after Tokyo. He was a great swimmer before, but had a much different training approach when he was on the Gold Coast there. Are you surprised by how quick he's had success again?
No. Not after. I probably only need to watch him train for maybe a couple of months before I knew that he was going to do something special. And whether that was making the World Championships team and winning a gold medal, probably not. But I knew that it would come at some point. And, obviously this year's the big year. But, I think the way that he went about his training, the pressure he put on himself to get things right, and then just tracking his progress over the season, like watching him get faster and faster, it was pretty evident that he was going to swim well at trials. I'm not surprised, but also he comes from he comes from a high work program. Like as an age grouper, he was doing like, 400 IMs and 400 free and open water, and like his capacity for work as a young swimmer was massive. I remember we had like a state teams competition in like the late 2000s, and he swam like 9 events or something and won basically all of them. So yeah, I think that training, whilst it's completely different to the 50, I think like it shows how much of a talented athlete he is, and it doesn't matter where he's like honing his focus, he does really well. So yeah, it's cool.
In Australia, I think still is kind of coming around to some of this training philosophy, particularly for sprinters, from what Cam and what I've heard from others in Australia. Do we think that Cam and Isaac Cooper's success is going to start, moving that ball a little quicker towards a little bit more focus and acceptance towards, some more, dedicated sprint training and focus on these things that you've been working with him in particular on?
Yeah, I think so. I think like even before Cam, we started to look at how do we specialize in the 50, and how do we create swim programs that are geared at just swimming well in the 50.
Yeah.
I think like it's the balance, right? There's a certain amount of training that you have to be able to do, and it's not necessarily the same for everyone. I think the resistance training that Cam does is working well for him, but he's also an incredibly talented athlete. And I always get the question of from other athletes like, oh, can I drop off the amount of volume that I do and just do what Cam does and be good at the 50? And I always say, well, there's a whole bunch of like talent that Cam has that allows him to be good at certain things for the 50 freestyle. So yeah, this is going to be a bit of a range of what a 50 specialist looks like in terms of their training. And I think Cam's certainly pushing the narrative of more specific work for that type of event, and I think we'll get there. I mean, I'd love to see the form stroke 50s at the Olympics. I think that would open up I think that would definitely allow for specialist 50 programs. It would allow for athletes to continue swimming like further into their career as like a late 30s, early 40s athlete. It would, create longevity. I think it would have a whole bunch of positive outcomes. But at the moment, I think, we're starting to push that way.
You got 3 supporters in your corner on that one.
And Nick Santos.
Yeah. Let's hear it for the early 40s guys. Hey, so what makes people trust you? Like for somebody like Cam, and that's not a knock. I'm just like curious what your pitch is to athletes, or if you need to. Like you mentioned that Cam came to you, and obviously by association with QAS, there's access to athletes, and I'm sure like a byproduct of you working with some, then that breeds connections with others. But how do you kind of measure your success, and then leverage that to gain trust with these athletes that what you're doing, especially if it's hard? I mean, these things are hard to implement often, and so and you might be suggesting something that's new and different or radical based on what athletes have seen or heard for their entire career. So what's your approach to that?
Yeah, that's I hadn't really thought of that before. The example with Cam, he came to the QAS. He actually went to my boss first and said, I'm looking for some help in this area. Can you work out who might be able to help me? And when she spoke to me, I thought, oh, that's cool. Like that's a interesting project. But there are a few of us that do the same job as me. So, I mean, in Queensland, obviously, we have a large percentage of the swimmers, and the QAS dedicates most of its resources to swimming. So there are at least like 4 or 5 people that do a similar job to me. So it wasn't like guaranteed that I was going to be working with Cam. I just put my hand up and said, yeah, I'd be keen to have a crack at this and meet with him. So that's how that sort of worked out. And then I think traditionally with a squad where you've got a few athletes and you're working with the coach, it's probably more about your relationship with the coach first to get the buy-in into the program. So they might have certain things that they want to improve, and they might meet with some staff to say, this is what I want to do. How are we going to go about this? And then the information that you give them at that point is probably crucial. So if you've done your homework on the athletes' performances, and a lot of these athletes I've been working with since they were younger, so it's a little bit easier because they've got heaps of stuff they need to fix. And you can get buy-in really quickly by just watching them do something, saying something, and then getting them to make the change. That's usually how I get the buy-in, is just like a low-hanging fruit, like you said before. They feel faster, or the next time they swim at a competition, their turns have improved dramatically, and then they go, oh, that must have been Nick. But yeah, I think it's probably one, do your homework. Have all the numbers, like that meeting I had with Cam where I said, okay, well, here's a breakdown of your 50 and your 100. And I think if you're going to go 21-0, then you've got to be able to improve this aspect of your race. So having the knowledge that they trust what you're talking about. And then it's probably the relationship, because it's not just about being good at knowing the stats. You have to translate the information into coaching cues, essentially. It's like technical coaching. So yeah, you need to know how they tick, what when to push them and when to back off. Like if they're in a bad mood, or they're really fatigued and they don't want to listen to you talking about where their hand should be or where their head should be, knowing the right time to make the change. I think that's probably the two main things.
And you mentioned, like you said, taking this information to Cam and kind of doing like a diagnosis on some of his races when you were kind of reviewing them. Do you have a standard procedure that you follow yourself when you're like, all right, I'm going to watch 10 of their races? Is it mostly, getting, analytical, time-based assessments, or are you also jotting down just your general interpretations as well?
Yeah, I normally look at like a race report. So we have like a really good system for analyzing the Australian swimmers, where we can break down like all of the aspects of their race in terms of time as well as stroke mechanics. So we can look at all their rates and counts. So I normally look at all these numbers first and probably do a little bit of a comparison, either to domestic athletes or international athletes, depending on what ones we have, finding those gaps first. And then I'll look at the video and see if there's anything like that I see from a race video, which is usually, really far away, and it's not underwater or anything like that, unless you can find some broadcast footage of them swimming under the water. So yeah, I will look at the numbers first and then look at the video and see if any of those sort of match up. Sometimes you get to the point where you don't have anyone to compare to anymore. Like we had that with Ariarne, going 356 and then 355, and we've got no one to chase. So how do we actually make her faster? And yeah, like it's understanding like what their strengths are, how close to the ceiling are they in a particular part, what can they still improve. And I think like, with some of them, you may have had a goal to improve like their turns or maybe their start, and they may not have got quite there in that particular aspect, but the time was really quick. So that you can still keep chipping away at that part that they were working on. Or, like if you've got someone like Arnie where they're swimming 400 meters and you're trying to improve her turns, and she may have got 3 of the turns really well and 4 of them fell off at the end. So it's about improving the consistency. It's exciting to be able to like work right at the edge of the event and the athlete. And then you've got some younger ones that you've got heaps of benchmarks to compare to. And if, when you've got a squad that's got lots of athletes working head to head, you can put them against each other and say, well, this person's better than you at this, and you're better than them at this particular aspect. So let's try and work together and improve both.
Are you most often using the benchmarks as current elite athletes, and or are there some like historical references of people who have done things really technically great that still continue to serve as a great example, even though maybe today they're overall faster because of strength, nutrition, diet,
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah, I've definitely gone back and looked at races from like the late. We've got some races back to early 2000s, like with Ian Thorpe. Working with Elijah and trying to improve his 400. I did look at some races from Thorpe and from Grant Hackett, and yeah, trying to pick apart like what made them good in terms of like just the numbers. Like you can pull out characteristics of their swimming that people see as like really good. Like Thorpe had a great kick. And I know Thorpe's coach is always on about how good your kick needs to be a good 400 freestyler. So how do we use that? And yeah, I think I probably like lean towards more recent performances, but there have been times where it's cool to go back and look at historical numbers. Unfortunately, we don't have everything, but yeah, I find myself like trawling through YouTube for those races, like when Thorpe went 341, not in a suit, in like 2001 in Manchester, like that. Yeah, it's so cool to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Have there been? Listen, we're human and we swim, we race, and we're gonna do things once in a while. In American football, they call it audible. Like we do stuff, we adjust the race. Have you seen stuff in a race that like, well, that's not what we planned, but they made an adjustment there, and that was cool. Like, there's a good story of Sarah Sostrom at ISL 100 IM. And she said, "Yeah, I just decided not to breathe the last 25 because that's what needed to happen.
Yeah.
I didn't plan that. That's what needed to happen." Do you have a story of like somebody doing something you didn't plan and like, oh, well, okay?
I do actually, and it's probably on the similar lines to Sarah. And it was just at a national competition last year with Molly, and racing the 200. I think it was the 200, and it was like Shayna was out in the side lane, and she went out really hard. And I'm not sure if Molly saw her, but she put her head down for the last 15, like just didn't breathe. And we hadn't planned that, but she knew instinctively that if she's going to get her hand on the wall first, she had to do something different because those girls were close. So yeah, like they're the kind of decisions that you see, champions make those decisions and like improvise in the moment. And you need to allow for them to be able to do that. Like they can be planned and you can have a goal for a race execution, but you got to allow them to be able to go, I know that if I'm going to win, I need to do this. So yeah, it's cool to see that, and you build that into their race profile the next time that they race. Like Molly's been able to change her breathing pattern like between a heat and a final, which not all athletes can do. So yeah, it's interesting, but it works.
Yeah. Do you have a plan B? Do you say, listen, if in the last 50 of that 200 you're really hurting, let's go more on your legs as opposed to, do you have a plan B of these athletes? Do you have like a different strategy biomechanically that works with this race pacing strategy?
From a technique point of view, I want it to be pretty set before they get to the competition. Like you don't want to be trying to change too much because you want it to be autonomous for them. They're going to stand up behind the blocks and they're just going to race. So you don't want them thinking too much about, where their head should be or where their arms should be while they're trying to compete. So yeah, I want them to get to a point where the technical execution is fairly automatic. And most of that stuff with the plan A and plan B, that would be up to the coach. So Dean would have all those conversations with them before the race. I might talk to him about some stuff that I see, but then when he's delivering like before they go to marshalling, okay, this is what you got to do. He'll have those discussions. Yeah.
Switching gears to kind of more age group swimmers, I work with a fair amount of larger age group clubs in the States, and a lot of them are asking me about heart rate variability, monitoring recovery, and all these things. And I always tell them probably the most beneficial use of resources, in my opinion, is just to get some sort of camera and video replay system at the end of each lane so the swimmers can touch, watch their self swim and their own technique. And you can have this for multiple lanes for under $1,000 before going down the rabbit hole of these other, avenues, which can be helpful, but I think are just missing the larger picture. I'd love to get your views though on, what age group coaches or teams could do to better or maybe understand and utilize video analysis and biomechanics on their level.
I think if they have, firstly, a good understanding of what their technique model is, that's probably the first thing. So every coach is going to look at strokes differently. I think once they know what they want each stroke to look like, it's about probably upskilling the entire squad to get to that level. Because if you make the baseline really high, then you can start doing the individual changes with the athletes as they get older. There are some really easy cameras to use now. GoPros are really easy, but they can be a little bit finicky with getting the footage off and actually reviewing them. There are some better live replay systems. We use Swim Pro cameras fairly regularly because you can just have the iPad sitting either with yourself or down on the pool deck where the athletes can watch it on a delay. I think video is good, but it can be overused. And I've seen some athletes who have video feedback so often that they can't feel whether their stroke is good or bad because they're so used to looking at the video and using that to determine what it looks like. So I think it's important to you be strategic with how you use video, give them time to use it to see what it looks like. And then when you take it away, maybe quiz them. Do you think you did that? The thing that you're working on, do you think you nailed it? Yes or no? Okay. You said yes, but the video says probably needs to change a little bit more. So aligning the feel with what it looks like is important too. But I think if we can introduce some video feedback earlier, then that can be beneficial for sure.
Do you think that with the athletes that use video too much, they just need to like you said, have it maybe used more early on with a new skill so they can have some more confidence that they're acquiring it, and then remove or provide that video feedback less and less often so they can, like I said, they confirm that they have it with the video early on, then you start using it less and less to, firm up that through motor learning?
Yeah, that's how I typically approach a season. They'll use a lot of video early in the season, particularly when they're building their aerobic base. So they're doing a lot more longer swimming at lower intensity. It's the perfect time to change techniques. So they all have their key things that they're working on while we're doing that block. They'll get video with a little bit of feedback from me. And then at some points they'll have the opportunity to just review on their own. And then you're just slowly stripping that away as they move through the season. You take it away, they become confident in making the change without having to see it. And then, you're just giving them check-ins and saying, I remember when you were working on this, this is still really good, or no, you need to make sure that you keep focusing on that part. That's how I typically use it. And then obviously once you've made the change and you've been able to assess that at some competitions that they've done it in the pinnacle pressure, fatigue, execution of all the things, then, okay, well, what's the new challenge? What are we working on now? And then you go back and you start again. Yeah.
The video camera thing reminded me of, there's a pool we swam at and they had these 1 meter long mirrored plastic things that you put on the bottom of the lane. And I would lay 8 of them down. So I get a good 20 meters of me seeing myself. And I freaking love that as an athlete, see myself swim. What equipment or what tools are you using that we don't know about, or that you wish we had, or the swimmers wish they had, that could help us progress the sport and biomechanics feedback? Is there anything out there that you wish we had or you're using?
Oh yeah, a lot.
And not for Luke's selfies.
No, it's my selfie. I like myself,
Yeah. I think if we got to a point where you could do a 3D motion analysis of a swimmer easily, then that would be probably the gold standard of being able to work out like which movement patterns, arm angles, and joint locations is going to be optimal for that swimmer. So yeah, putting a markerless system where you can literally see the body in a 3D space is very difficult with swimming because the water refracts all the light. There's been a couple of systems that have come out over the years, but they're not quite there yet. We're getting close to like some autonomous machine vision systems where that can do a similar thing. And probably the other thing we don't understand is like how the body interacts with water at different speeds. And, there's some research being done in pockets about like, obviously it's not a uniform drag coefficient when you start to get faster. The wave sits in a different spot around your body that has implications for timing and body position and when you need to be propulsive. So we don't know everything about that yet. Just like really simple systems for like measuring free swim velocity. Like we're starting to get, really good with inertial sensors that you can just put on the hip or the back of the shoulders and work out how fast they're going. Is there any difference between left and right catch? How much are their hips rotating? Just being able to like pull out the numbers on that quickly. I think that's probably where we're going to get to next, where you can literally just put a device on the back, get them to swim 50 meters, pull it out, and then you just download the whole data set, maybe match it up with some video. I think that would be really powerful.
I wish I knew somebody doing their PhD thesis on relay starts and technique around that. Do you know anybody who's doing that right now? Talk to us about what you're doing your PhD on. Because that's not, you're doing a PhD thesis on relay starts. I mean, yeah, Brian, John, and I have spent hours on our relay starts, but what's your PhD thesis on, and how is that going to
I've been doing it for a long time. Sometimes I forget what my PhD is on. So the reason why I chose relay starts was because I felt like it was something that we didn't really look too closely at as a key contributor to relay team performance. So the first part of it was just to look at historical relay races and the influence of the start on the performance. So I wanted to look at all of those athletes that competed at the highest level, so World Championships, Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, if they were doing like the 100-meter freestyle and they also competed in the 4x1, what was the difference in their split times? And what was the difference in their start times? And were they actually getting the benefit of the relay start, being able to like move before, generate momentum off the block? And then the next part was, okay, well, what technique is actually good? Because we've seen so many evolutions of relay start technique over the last probably 10 to 15 years. The American college system, like bringing the step over where they like stand at the back of the block and jump over the top, and how much impact does that have? How hard is that to actually get right? Obviously, when you have to move from a place that's further back, that's going to take more time and there's more room for error. How often do coaches and athletes practice relays? I know it's different depending on where you swim, but a lot of our guys probably don't practice relays as often as they should. They don't get some real life competition performances leading into, World Champs or an Olympics where they're doing lots of relays. So is that a problem? Do we need to actually like make time for them to practice it more? It was about what have we done in the past? What techniques are actually going to be beneficial? Can we narrow down the technique selection? Because there's probably 8 or 9 different techniques depending on how many steps you take. Do you do an arm circle? Do you just swing your arms? Do you leave the block with track start, 1 foot at the front, at the back, or do you leave the block with 2 feet at the front? Trying to find something that's going to be a little bit more prescriptive for athletes, depending on what their characteristics are. How well do they jump? We know swimmers are not typically good jumpers. If their vertical jump is not very good, do we have to improve that in order to improve their relay? So there's a few aspects there that I was looking at.
Okay, doctor. Well, what's the answer?
No, I'm not a doctor yet. I'm far away from being a doctor. Yeah, I think there's I'm interested to see whether the like leaving with the split foot, I think might end up being better because they do so many practices with like their normal start as a track start, right? So they always have one foot like on the kicker. So it would make sense that their relay changeover is also doing that. But when they leave the block in that position, it's much harder for them to like get down with the big arm swing and generate power. So it's a bit of a trade-off between like how do you get off the block consistently, and we see those relay teams that are breaking world records now, particularly in the 4x1. All of the changeovers are like under 0.2. Like you can't have a team member that like blows out to 0.35 because they'll lose the race or they won't get the time. So the other important part is like medley relays. How do you judge butterfly and breaststroke is really hard to judge. So how do we like encourage more practice where the male and female teams know exactly how to judge butterfly, because obviously the strokes take longer, getting the timing right is hard. And then now with mixed relays as well, males judging off females and females judging off males, like most of the girls are not ready for how fast the guys are swimming into the wall. So that can change the changeover time as well. So there's a few of those like practice and skill learning things that they have to get right in order to be able to execute that like in the moment.
Have you found anything that can help with getting the timing right besides reps?
I think like maybe we can train people to get better at relays without necessarily like having to get on a block at a pool and do it. Like I'm maybe like pre-recording some scenarios of like swimmers coming in like on a screen where they can, if there's members of the team that that you might be swimming with, like just watching them swim and learning how they finish a race. I think that can just be a little bit of implicit learning to help them get better. Like, you always see like a Kyle Chalmers, how fast he finishes and how he always gets his hand on the wall. Like how often are the other guys in our team watching him finish and knowing exactly how he finishes? Kate Campbell's got a really long stroke.
From above too, like that's such a different perspective. You see, plenty of them have watched him swim, but how many of them have seen him from the top view when you're standing, how like 2 meters above?
Yeah, and you've got like, Kate Campbell has a really long stroke. Like she doesn't take that many strokes going into the walk. She's holding so much water. So what's the difference between watching her finishes versus Bronte or Shayna, who have a higher stroke rate? I think probably we can just give the athletes an opportunity to learn a bit more about their teammates without actually having to get them in the same pool all the time doing changeovers.
Yeah, my high school teammate Arthur Bolden always talked about the people who win the 4x1 in track are the ones with the turnover, with the handovers, right? Who can practice that, who can nail that handover in track. Whenever I was on a national team for Trinidad, the training camp we did for national team, it was like primarily practicing our relay takeovers. And, we set who, like, okay, I know Brian's going to be ahead of me, but it wasn't that often. I didn't get to do that many reps of it. How important is it really that I know how Brian Lundquist is coming into the wall versus John Mullen? It makes a big difference. Do you agree? Like,
Yeah.
But we don't get that much opportunity to practice that because unless I'm on a national team for the last 10 years, you don't get as much opportunity.
I think that particularly for those, the 4x1 is probably the big one. 4x2, like you've got more time to, like there's more swimming time, right? So the changeover is probably more about being safe rather than trying to like get a really short changeover time. But we've seen relays won and lost within 0.05 of a second. So if you can improve that with a changeover without any effort, and it's just a skill learning. Why not?
Agreed.
One thing I was thinking about, thinking of some of the middle distance swimmers you've worked with, is that most of them don't seem to have a large galloping freestyle stroke. Is that something that you think is, not as efficient as compared to a more symmetrical stroke? I know in the, a lot of the swimming research shows, a more symmetrical stroke should be more beneficial. Than we saw a big wave with like Phelps and some of these guys with a really, large gallop in their stroke where, I think a lot of coaches like, what does the swimming science even know? Look at Phelps. He's the fastest. He's got this huge gallop in his stroke. Could you expand on kind of what you think on middle D in particular, that technique?
I think probably the athlete that sort of changed it for me watching her swim across multiple distances was Ledecky. The way she swims, like from the 100 meters all the way up to the 1500, is just the same stroke basically at a higher or lower rate. So like really good opposition timing, and no dead spots in her stroke. And I think that that's probably the way a lot of the middle distance guys that I work with go from an efficiency perspective. But yeah, we've seen highly successful, particularly distance swimmers, swim with like a bit of a lope stroke or a bit more catch up. For example, like Mac Horton has a really like catch up type stroke, and has had success with that technique. So I think it's some of those guys swim like that, and it's efficient in terms of like their energy cost. But then others like need to be able to apply pressure the whole time and not have any like dead spots with their hands out in front. So yeah, I don't think there's hard and fast rules on it yet. I think we know that there's going to be more of a lope, like depending on how you breathe as well. And I think like a lot of our like male freestylers that lope, they actually accelerate really well on that like breath stroke. So they like lie out a little bit more in front, but they can generate a lot of force after that stroke, and that causes the lope. And sometimes when you try and get them to swim with like more traditional opposition timing, they can't do it. So they love being able to like, accelerate way more on one arm than the other. And that's what causes that lope. So yeah, I can't say either way that one is better than the other. But yeah, I think maybe for certain distances, there's probably one that's more preferred, but yeah, we've got so many. I think like the girls that race the 200 free, they all swim pretty similar. Elijah swims the 400 frees a little bit more lopey. Jack Cartwright swims the 100 frees a little bit more lopey. And then you've got like, the guys that swim the 50, like Cam, completely opposite timing and like perfect either side. Like there's no difference between left and right arm. So I think it's definitely individual. Yeah. The kick plays a massive part in that too. Like Molly has a fantastic kick, and that allows her to be a little bit different with her catch. So yeah, it's about those individual strengths, like what makes them good, even though their technique looks different.
Yeah. All right, Nick, we know you got to go, so I'm just going to end with a few quick rapid fire here. Who's got the best technique you've ever seen?
I just said that there's multiple techniques that are different, so I can't really say that one looks better than the other.
Rapid.
Oh.
Yeah,
I can't answer that. I've been privileged to work with 4 or 5 world champions in the same event that swim with different techniques. So I can't say that one looks better than the other. So I'm not gonna answer that one.
All right, maybe the flip side, and maybe not one of your athletes, but who's got the worst stroke you've ever seen, but was really successful in the pool?
There's one athlete that comes to mind that is hard to watch just from my like perfectionist freestyle view, and that's Paltrinieri. But he must have an unbelievable engine, And I just think every time I watch him swim, I think, if we just fix that and we just fix that, the guy would be like the world record holder for sure. Yeah.
All right, what's your personal biggest swimming flaw that you hope none of your athletes have to watch you do?
Oh, me swimming?
Yeah.
I think probably my tumble turns. Yeah.
All right. Last one is how important is social kick to optimizing swimming speed?
Definitely important, because I think every time the athletes get prescribed kick, they always ask if it's going to be social kick. So yeah, I think it's important for the guys that spend with their head down for hours and hours to have their head up and chat to someone's important. Yeah.
That's the answer. All right, movement scientist Nick Smith, thanks for sharing some of your big brain with us. We appreciate it. It's been fun hanging out.
No worries. Thank you.
All right, that's it for this episode of Social Kick. We'll see you next time.
Hey everybody, thanks for hanging out with us. If you're enjoying Social Kick, tell your friends about it, and be sure to tell us what you liked by leaving a comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Social Kick, and you can find all of our content on our website,